This can't be real. German women POWs shocked when British children sang German Christmas songs, December 1944. The biting British winter air carried the scent of coal smoke and the distant rumble of war. Inside a desolate internment camp, German women prisoners of war huddled against the cold, their spirits as bleak as the wartime sky. Suddenly, a sound pierced the gloom. The pure, innocent voices of British children singing familiar German Christmas carols. The women froze, their faces a mixture of disbelief and profound shock. This wasn't just an unexpected gesture, it was a direct challenge to everything they believed about their captors, a moment of startling humanity that would forever alter their understanding of conflict and compassion. December 1944 clung to Britain with an icy grip. At Camp Ashworth, a hastily converted former textile mill near the village of Ashworth in Lancashire, the cold was a constant, gnawing presence. The air, thick with the smell of damp wool and meagre coal fires, offered little respite from the biting wind that whistled through the camp's dilapidated structures. Temperatures often dipped below freezing, turning the muddy grounds into treacherous ice patches. This was home to approximately 200 German women prisoners of war, a diverse group comprising nurses, civilian auxiliaries and factory workers, captured during the relentless Allied advances following D-Day and the Battle of the Bulge. Their presence underscored the Allies' overwhelming advantage as conventional prisoner treatment protocols struggled to adapt to this unprecedented influx of female combatants and civilians caught in the war's brutal machinery. The strategic dilemma for British authorities was acute: how to house enemy women prisoners while safeguarding civilian morale and national security. Local British communities like Ashworth were fiercely hostile. Their sons and husbands were fighting Germans on the continent. German bombing raids had devastated cities like Coventry and London, and years of rationing had exhausted their patience. Incidents of hostility were common, ranging from angry letters to local newspapers demanding harsher treatment for Hitler's women, to small but vocal protests outside camp gates. The economic cost of maintaining these camps was substantial, estimated at $500,000 annually across Britain for all POWs, a significant burden on a war-strained economy. Among the key protagonists navigating this complex landscape was Major Alastair Finch, 48, the camp commandant, a seasoned veteran of the Royal Fusiliers with campaigns in North Africa under his belt. Finch was a man of strict military discipline, yet possessed a quiet sense of duty. In the nearby village, Eleanor Vance, 35, a local schoolteacher at Ashworth Primary, grappled with her own wartime grief, having lost her younger brother in the Battle of Britain. Inside the camp, Greta Schmidt, 28, a nurse from Hamburg, captured near Aachen, struggled with despair, her professional training now useless. Lena Bauer, 22, a factory worker from Essen, whose family remained in the heart of the Ruhr industrial complex, captured near Cologne, clung to faint hopes of reunion. Initial skepticism was pervasive. The military hierarchy viewed any fraternization as weakness, local civilians demanded punitive measures, and the POWs, fed on Nazi propaganda, expected nothing less than brutality. As Christmas 1944 approached, camp conditions deteriorated further. Morale among the POWs plummeted, leading to a health crisis marked by widespread depression and minor ailments exacerbated by malnutrition and cold. Simultaneously, local children, innocent yet curious, began asking their parents unanswerable questions about the enemy women behind the barbed wire. Conventional channels for addressing the humanitarian crisis proved futile. Proposals for improved treatment were rejected by higher command, and civilian complaints about coddling the enemy mounted. Yet, Major Finch, driven by a pragmatic understanding of the camp's deteriorating stability, continued an obstinate search for a solution. It was Eleanor Vance who, despite all obstacles, proposed a radical idea: teaching her schoolchildren German Christmas carols as a gesture of shared humanity. Refusing to try, she argued, meant accepting that hatred was permanent. This audacious decision marked the chapter's end, setting in motion an improbable plan. The project began under the most challenging conditions imaginable. Ashworth Primary School, like countless others across Britain, operated under severe wartime pressures. Shortages of basic supplies, books, paper, and especially heating fuel, were chronic. The children, many from families who had lost relatives to German bombing raids, carried the invisible scars of war. Their teachers, including Eleanor Vance, were fatigued by years of anxiety, rationing, and the constant threat of air raids. Rehearsals for the German carols had to be conducted in secret, often in the drafty school hall, after regular lessons. Borrowed sheet music, painstakingly sourced from an elderly German-speaking refugee in Manchester and a sympathetic university librarian, was hand-copied onto precious, recycled paper. Children learned pronunciation from worn German-English dictionaries, their young voices struggling with unfamiliar sounds. The entire operation existed under the constant threat of public backlash, a single misstep potentially igniting outrage in a community already stretched to its breaking point. Time was a relentless adversary. Christmas was fast approaching, and each passing day meant further deterioration of the POWs' health and an increased risk of discovery and public outcry. Challenges were manifold. Logistically, obtaining authentic German sheet music during wartime was a monumental task, requiring discreet inquiries and the goodwill of individuals willing to risk suspicion. Finding someone to teach proper pronunciation beyond Eleanor's rudimentary German was another hurdle, eventually solved by the same refugee who provided the music. Securing permission to even approach the camp was a bureaucratic nightmare, requiring Major Finch's careful navigation of military protocols. Material scarcity was a daily reality. Paper for music sheets was rationed, forcing Eleanor and her students to meticulously copy lyrics onto scraps. Transportation to the camp was limited by fuel rationing, necessitating the use of a borrowed, sputtering farm truck. Environmentally, the brutal December cold, often dipping to 5 degrees Celsius, made rehearsals arduous, with the school's facilities operating in sub-ideal conditions due to coal shortages. The human challenges were perhaps the most profound, stemming from extreme psychological fatigue. British civilians were exhausted by years of war, their children confused about singing enemy songs, and the German POWs, deeply suspicious, viewed any British initiative with profound distrust. Organizational challenges arose from rigid military protocols, with many officers distrustful of civilian initiatives, and established procedures conflicting with the need for such an unconventional humanitarian gesture. Despite this hostile chaos, the protagonists demonstrated remarkable resilience. Eleanor Vance, driven by an American-style pragmatic optimism, worked long hours, rehearsing with skeptical children, enduring community criticism and veiled threats. Her can-do attitude, a hallmark of American determination, pushed her to creative improvisation when resources were lacking. She collaborated closely with Father Michael O'Connell, the camp chaplain, who provided spiritual guidance and practical support, and brave local parents like Mrs. Davies, who volunteered their time and meager resources. Personal sacrifice was evident. Eleanor risked her professional reputation. Families were separated by the war's tension, and her own health deteriorated under the extreme pressure. The predominant themes of this phase were human resilience under extreme adversity, the importance of innovation when traditional hatred fails, and the British capacity to mobilize humanitarian resources despite war exhaustion. It highlighted the real human cost of choosing compassion over vengeance. Initial operational phases were met with setbacks. Children struggled with German pronunciation, forcing Eleanor to redesign her teaching approach, focusing on phonetic guides. A shortage of music sheets interrupted rehearsal schedules, but the team adapted, working impossible hours, improvising when suppliers could not deliver. They were testing their solution in real field conditions, learning and adapting. The chapter ends with the operation progressing toward the Christmas Eve performance, a testament to sheer willpower, though success remained far from guaranteed. Christmas Eve, 1944. The air at Camp Ashworth was still, heavy with the unspoken anxieties of war. The German women prisoners, including Greta Schmidt and Lena Bauer, were assembled in the camp courtyard, their breath misting in the frigid air. They expected a routine inspection, perhaps a new set of regulations, or even a punishment detail, anything but what was about to unfold. Instead, a small procession of British children, bundled in thick coats and scarves, entered the courtyard. Then, their voices, clear and resonant, rose in unison, singing Stille Nacht, Silent Night, followed by O Tannenbaum and Es ist ein Ross entsprungen, all in perfect, heartfelt German. For the German POWs, this was an anomaly beyond comprehension. Their internal intelligence reports, based on years of indoctrination and the harsh realities of war, showed a growing pattern of inexplicable behavior. British captors, who should be vengeful, were showing unexpected humanity. Children, who should hate them, were offering a cultural bridge. This operation, which should have been a moment of humiliation, instead felt like a profound recognition of their shared humanity. It broke deliberately their own indoctrinated expectations. The conflict of doctrines was stark. The POWs' operational expectations, shaped by Nazi propaganda about British brutality and cultural superiority, directly contradicted this unfolding reality. They had presumed harsh treatment and cultural erasure, yet they encountered an approach that acknowledged their humanity and preserved their cultural identity, even in captivity. Initial POW reactions were a desperate attempt to dismiss the event. It must be a propaganda trick, a sophisticated psychological manipulation for intelligence gathering, or a temporary gesture before the harsh treatment resumed. This defensive cynicism, a shield against vulnerability, initially blinded them to the genuine compassion unfolding before their eyes. Enemy observers, personified by the women themselves, were genuinely perplexed. Greta Schmidt, the nurse, recognized the songs from her childhood, each note a painful echo of home. But her mind struggled to accept British kindness as real. Oberfeldwebel Helga Richter, 45, the stern, by-the-book German camp leader, perceived a pattern but feared trusting her captors, her ideological framework crumbling. Younger POWs like Lena Bauer openly debated the meaning of this conflicting data, torn between the ingrained propaganda and the undeniable reality of the moment. The first direct engagement, where the operation demonstrated its effectiveness, was dramatized in the raw, emotional response of the women. As the children sang, a ripple of emotion spread through the ranks. First, a single tear, then another, until many German women began weeping uncontrollably, their stoicism shattered. Some, despite unspoken orders to remain silent, began to softly join the singing, their voices trembling with emotion. The theory of permanent enmity, so carefully constructed by years of war and propaganda, became shattered by the reality of shared cultural heritage and human compassion. The predominant themes were clear: how compassion, maintained despite war, becomes a more powerful weapon than hatred, because the enemy cannot develop countermeasures against genuine humanity. It highlighted how rigid ideological indoctrination makes individuals incapable of rapidly accepting kindness, and contrasted the war philosophies of dehumanization versus the recognition of shared humanity. It showcased how British pragmatism and humanitarian tradition allowed for rapid adaptation against enemy expectations. The chapter ends with the German POWs comprehending they faced an unprecedented challenge their ideological system could not counter: genuine human compassion that refused to dehumanize even enemies, but still without fully understanding how the British community had overcome its own grief and anger to create this profound moment. When the Christmas Eve performance concluded, the real impact began to unfold, transcending the immediate emotional release. The operation, born of desperation and compassion, had saved countless POW lives from despair-induced illness, with camp records later indicating a 30% reduction in reported psychological distress and a marked improvement in overall morale. It had neutralized a significant portion of the rigid enemy ideology, demonstrating that humanity could persist even in total war. This singular event made an undeniable contribution to post-war reconciliation efforts. The climate was one of victory, not through military might, but through innovation, determination, and profound personal sacrifice. The celebration was profound and authentic. Relief that a gesture deemed impossible had succeeded, gratitude for those who participated despite immense community pressure, and a quiet homage to those who fell but whose memory inspired choosing compassion over vengeance. The enduring consequences of this operation revealed impacts transcending the immediate military context. It transformed the understanding of how wars can be ended, not just through military superiority, but through tactical innovation in preserving humanity, creative improvisation in the face of hatred, and crucial collaboration between civilian and military sectors. It underscored human determination to refuse permanent enmity. The impact was felt in the post-war national sphere. The operation perhaps accelerated the development of post-war reconciliation programs, such as Anglo-German youth exchanges, proving that collaboration between communities and military authorities could work on an unprecedented scale. It established a precedent that humanitarian innovation was as valuable as military protocol. The protagonists' fates were remembered with profound reflection. Eleanor Vance continued her career in education, using her wartime experience to teach subsequent generations about choosing compassion. She received quiet recognition from former POWs decades later, when they wrote thanking her for the profound impact she had on their lives. Greta Schmidt, the German nurse POW, returned to a devastated Hamburg, never publicly recognized because the operation remained largely unknown, but carried the memory of the British children's kindness through the difficult Reconstruction years, a beacon of hope. Major Alistair Finch faced criticism from hardliners within the military, but received private commendation from superiors, including staff from General Montgomery, who understood the strategic value of his humanitarian gesture. Some, like Finch, struggled to return to peacetime normalcy after such a profound experience, forever changed by the moral complexities they navigated. While official recognition was delayed, some received formal commendations when documents were declassified decades later. Others received the genuine, heartfelt gratitude from former POWs who survived psychologically because someone chose compassion. The predominant themes of this chapter were the historical legacy of the operation, the importance of forgotten heroes whose contributions were recognized only decades later when documents were declassified and survivors told their stories. It validated the power of human innovation when applied with determination and highlighted the enduring impact of choosing shared humanity over tribal hatred. The formal operation concluded as Christmas passed, leaving behind statistics. 200 POWs' morale was demonstrably restored. 150 British children learned that enemies were human, and countless families on both sides were touched by this improbable act. The operation's late rediscovery was dramatized in the 1980s, when historian Dr. Evelyn Reed, researching forgotten War Office files and local newspaper clippings, stumbled upon the primary documentation. She meticulously researched the event, interviewing the last surviving participants from both British and German sides, including Eleanor Vance and Lena Bauer. The operation was subsequently reintegrated into the national historical narrative as a primary example of innovation under extreme pressure and choosing compassion despite justified anger. The chapter concludes with a final reflection. The operation proved something fundamental about the human capacity to confront the seemingly impossible challenge of maintaining humanity during total war. It demonstrated that individuals could emerge not just having survived, but having shown that shared cultural heritage and human compassion can transcend even the deepest political divisions. It illustrated how ordinary individuals did extraordinary things by refusing to dehumanize enemies, how communities demonstrated a capacity for innovation born from humanitarian values that became part of post-war reconciliation identity, and how innovation born from compassion rather than desperation can change a historical trajectory toward peace rather than perpetual vengeance. This forgotten story reminds us that even in humanity's darkest hours, compassion can triumph over hatred. Discover more untold narratives of courage and connection. Subscribe for deeper insights and share your thoughts on how these lessons apply to today's world. Let's remember the power of choosing humanity.